Welcome students. Today we'll be talking about the concept of auteur in cinema. As you can see, the spelling of auteur is a bit different from the English term author, though they roughly mean the same. This is happening because this term auteur, it comes from the French culture where the term means author plus something, like an great auteur, a remarkable auteur, something like that. And this term, therefore, is used almost unchanged in an unchanged way in English language too regarding film theory or film criticism. Now, the term author, as you know it, means someone who's created a body of work, a piece of work, a piece of art, or something like that. But here in cinema, the term author can't be easily used. So, who is the author of the film? In early years, there was a bit confusion regarding this. Is the producer an author of the film, a director an author of the film, or the screenplay writer who writes the screenplay is an author of the film, so on and so forth. So it took roughly 40 to 50 years to come in a conclusion that the director is the author of the film. And this coming to terms was not very easy because, as in other arts, like supposedly in painting, there is a single man who paints a painting. Or in case of a novel, there is a single man who writes a novel. Or in case of a song, there's a single person who is either singing the song or writing the song, so on and so forth, and they have different kind of departments altogether. But in case of cinema, this notion becomes a bit difficult because cinema is a collective and industrial art. It involves too many people, it involves too many decision makers. So there might be the producer who decides a lot about the film, there might be the directors who direct the actors and directs how the film will be told on the screen, how the story will be told on the screen. And there are many a times the presence of the stars who also has sufficient control over the film in case of mainstream cinema. So it's not as easy to kind of say that the director is an author of the film like that of a painter who is painting a single canvas. So, in the initial years, it was considered that the authorship is not very important in case of a film, which is a more industrial, mainstream, collective kind of venture. But by the 40s, intellectuals, thinkers who were thinking about cinema in France and in other places of the world, they came into the conclusion that to elevate cinema into a standard, to the standard of other arts, other respected arts, cinema must be considered a medium of individual expression. So, in 1945, a Frenchman named Alexander Astruc, he wrote an essay called The Birth of a New Avant-Garde, La Camera Stylo. Now, this La Camera Stylo is a French word and it's kept unchanged even when the essay is translated into English. What does this term mean? It means the camera pen. That is, when the camera can be used as a pen. And Alexander Astruc said in this essay that just after the wars, just after the advent of sound cinema, the cinema is gradually developing into a medium where a single individual artist can express his concerns, can express his thoughts, can express his ideas through cinema. And the new avant-garde of cinema, that is the new expressions which will be much step ahead from conventional cinema, must actually utilize, must exploit this idea that cinema can be the vehicle of a single individual's ideas, obsessions, thoughts, so on and so forth. So, in this case, we have two strands. One, a desire for a cinema which will be singularly by that of a single author, an auteur, and another critical exercise which is a bit different, which is searching for authors in mainstream cinema. That is cinema which where particularly one does not particularly search for authors. That is mainstream commercial cinema, mainly that of classical Hollywood. Because you know that Hollywood is a rigorously commercial setup. It's a business oriented setup, it's a profit centric setup, and it's a setup which is thoroughly coordinated, thoroughly controlled by the producer, by the studio. Therefore, it was not considered that within the premises, within the paradigm of classical Hollywood cinema, a worthwhile work of art can happen. But in the 1950s, certain French critics in a particular journal called Cahiers du Cinéma, which was founded by the famous theoretician, film theoretician André Bazin, in Cahiers du Cinéma, some very young critics, they started saying that all films and the best films in among all films, among all category of films, be it art, be it mainstream, so on and so forth, in all kinds of films, certain films which can be considered to be quality films are always expressions of a single individual, that is the author. Now, when they demanded this, and this particular policy of reading films were called the politique des auteurs, and when they demanded this, there were other film theoreticians, other film critics who didn't agree to this very idea. They said that this is impossible because cinema is an industrial collective art, it's a commercial art. There one can't say that a single individual called a director is expressing himself through the medium within the mainstream format. But the French critics of Cahiers du Cinéma, the young critics will later be famous filmmakers like Jean-Luc Godard, François Truffaut, Eric Rohmer, Claude Chabrol, Jacques Rivette, so on and so forth. They said that the best of the directors in Hollywood are those directors who clearly has left their individual stamps, the individual signatures in their films in spite of the thorough control of the studio and the producers. Now, how did they do this? How did they confirm, how did they affirm their claim that even during the classical Hollywood phase, even in the classical Hollywood system, certain directors, they left their imprint. They did this by rigorously viewing the films, by rigorously studying the films. And then they said that the good directors, they are of three categories. In the first category lies those directors who have a good mastery over the craftsmanship of cinema. That is, they are well conversant with the language of cinema. They know how cinema can create dramatic impacts, dramatic effects, so on and so forth. And they said that there will be one category of directors who are master of craftsmen. Then there will be few directors who are better than them, fewer in number but better than them, who does not only have a good mastery over the language of cinema but also has a distinct style. So the earlier category directors who had enough command over the language of cinema, they didn't have a distinct style. They are all alike. They were good directors, but all alike. Then comes the next category where these directors, they have a distinct style, a distinct signature. And these young critics, they kind of saw the films again and again of their favorite director, and they found out that certain directors, they have certain stylistic similarities. There are stylistic similarities in their works. Supposedly, Alfred Hitchcock used good tracking shots, or John Ford uses long shots in a particular kind of way. So they would say that these shots and these devices, these are signaturial styles of the director. And they would then try to understand that what these signatorial styles or signatorial themes or signatorial treatments of subject or certain signatorial situations or characters which are found in this film, in the films of these directors, and they repeat it again and again. What do they mean? And now they will come to the last rung of the directors, who are the greatest directors of all. That is the best auteurs. So who are these best auteurs? Not only they have a good mastery over the craftsmanship of cinema, not only they have a distinct signaturial style, but they have a distinct worldview. That is, they have a particular universe of their own. So if you watch Hitchcock's films, then you will say that the Hitchcock's films are governed by a certain philosophy with a particular idea about the world. A particular idea of the world emanates from the world of Hitchcock's films. These directors, who are very handful, who are very few, but who have good command over the language of cinema, a distinct style, and a distinct worldview, they become the great auteurs. So, this celebration of the auteurs in Cahiers du Cinema by these young French critics, they had a definite impact in the entire film scenario in the end of 1950s and beginning of 1960s. One impact was the gradual advent of the French New Wave, which was an entire film movement which called for personal cinemas or first person cinema, as they would say. That is cinema which would promote, which would convey the personal vision of individual directors. The next impact was that of the formation of canon from art cinema or commercial cinema, Hollywood cinema or European art cinema, both. That is, who are the greatest directors within this history of cinema in the 50 years or so. And third was a definite desire for a new art cinema where people would go to a film not to be merely entertained, not to be merely told an interesting story or a known story which they would love to see again and again, but for a definite kind of world of the director, a world created by the director. The director might be Federico Fellini, who creates a particular kind of world. The director might be Andrei Tarkovsky, who gives a particular vision of the world through his cinema. So this kind of art cinema, this desire for the art cinema was definitely a new kind of thing. And slowly, the art cinema, the European art cinema, unlike those European cinemas of 1920s, where like Soviet constructivist cinema, German expressionist cinema, French surrealist cinema, where the avant-garde cinema or art cinema were understood by their names, by the aesthetic movements which were associated with them. In 1960s, the art cinema, in case of art cinema, the audience expected a single individual director who is a thinker, who is thinking through cinema, like that of Antonioni, like that of Jean-Luc Godard, like that of Pier Paolo Pasolini, so on and so forth. Now, this has a definite impact in the world of film criticism also. And this idea called politique des auteurs was translated into the concept of the auteur theory by Andrew Sarris in the beginning of 1960s. And Andrew Serres now translated this idea and applied this idea, this theoretical framework, this idea of the auteur into that of American cinema, and tried to say that American cinema can be understood by the list of the great auteurs, by what the great directors have done, rather than giving a normal history of the studio or the released films, so on and so forth. Now, Andrew Serres, the way Andrew Serres developed this style, and it had a severe impact on that of other critics. It led to certain problems. That is, this idea of auteurs, it depended upon the critic. Who does the particular critic consider to be a great auteur? Would he keep John Ford in number one? Another critic might keep John Ford in number 3. Another critic might not keep John Ford in the top 10 lists of his favorite directors. So slowly it was understood that the idea of the auteur is becoming very subjective, very dependent on the taste of the critic. So slowly there was the need to redefine this theory, redefine the idea of the auteur theory, because the theory must be an objective framework of things which when applied to a body of work will yield the same result even if it's done by different critics altogether. So by the end of the 1960s, Peter Ulen, who was a famous film theoretician, he tried to redefine this auteur theory in a different kind of way. And he redefined it with the use of structuralism. So he said, by applying structuralism to auteur theory, he said that the auteur is a structure found in a group of films. And this auteur, this structure called the auteur, is not necessarily connected to that of the flesh and blood director. That is, the flesh and blood director, the real director per se, he might not be conscious about his styles, about his pet themes, about his obsessions, which is being evident in the screen. Now, this thing was needed because of certain embarrassment caused by famous directors, like that of John Ford, who, when interviewed by Peter Bogdanovich, when Peter Bogdanovich tried to ask him about the meaning of certain films of his, the way he reads John Ford's film, John Ford outrightly denied that his films has a definite kind of meaning. He said that he is a commercial filmmaker, he is a mainstream filmmaker, and he is not out there to make meaningful films like those of art cinema. Now, this was a definite embarrassment.
Search his heart and soul. Go searching way out there. His peace of mind he knows he'll find. But where, oh Lord, Lord, where? Right away, right
But it was evident that what the critics were saying about John Ford's film were true. So this need came that we must have a theory, a definite theory, where the auteur should not be something which should get approval from the director per se. That is, Hitchcock will approve. Yes, what you are saying is right. John Ford is say, yes, what you are saying, it was thought by me, so on and so forth. So Peter Ulen, when he used structuralism to understand auteur theory, he said that the auteur is a certain kind of pattern, certain kind of structure found in the films. That is, in films of John Ford, we find a particular thematic, we find a particular structure, which we can now name John Ford. In this way, auteur theory proceeded, and therefore a kind of reading of the text happened where one does not need the biographical details of the director. Who the director was, what kind of childhood he went through, and what are his favorite concerns, and so on and so forth. These biographical details slowly become irrelevant. Instead, an auteur, a great auteur, was actually understood through how his texts created meaning, how his text created particular structures of meaning, and the critics tried to understand this. Now, throughout the 60s, this particular way of understanding cinema, that is, as a medium of individual expression, sailed on very smoothly, and it gained quite few momentum because people started to understand that this is the only way to understand cinema. But slowly and slowly, this came to a certain kind of difficulties. Roland Barthes wrote this famous essay by the end of the 60s, which was called The Death of the Author, where he said that the meaning of a text cannot be understood by what the author intended, because he said that when the reader reads the text, reader makes meaning in his own kind of way. So the reader is free to make his meaning. Reader is free to even make meanings which the author might not have intended. And if the author's intention, if the author's prerogatives is already always the concern, then it will limit, restrict, restrain the possibilities of meaning of a text. Now this essay and the essay which followed within a few years, written by Michel Foucault, which was named What is an Author, these two had a definite impact in authorship studies, in auteur criticism of cinema. Because it was understood that throughout the 60s and 50s, what the critics have done, the critics who were called auteur critics, that is, those critics who tried to understand the auteur within cinema, how the auteur expresses his cinema. Because it was now understood that these auteurs were definitely doing something polemical which was excluding certain ideas, like that of genre. So John Ford's films can be understood of a particular kind. But if we take all his westerns, then what will he say? That the particular kind of meaning which is generated from John Ford's films is that of John Ford or that of western. So the genre will be also an important thing. Think of The Star. Think of Satyajit Ray's Porosh Pathor. Who is controlling the meaning of this film, Porosh Pathor? Is it Satyajit Ray or is it Tulsi Chakraborty? Think of the films made by Satyajit Ray, which is starring Chhobi Biswas, who is a great star. Or think of Satyajit Ray's films Nayak, where Uttam Kumar is almost like an author of the film because he defines what the star is like in the film. So these concerns slowly brought into complication the idea of the author, and the idea of authorship in cinema was slowly and slowly abandoned or deferred or postponed as far film theory is concerned. But still, it's not totally irrelevant because each year lots and lots of books of unimportant directors are being written, lots and lots of articles are being written which is searching out for new auteurs in cinema. Think of Iranian new cinema movement where we have auteurs like Abbas Kiarostami and Mohsen Maghbalbaf. And so it was understood that the idea of auteur might be a vexed, problematic thing. That is one person only responsible for the entire world of meaning in a film? One doesn't know. But we can say that this one person, that is the director, is definitely a very powerful presence in the film. And we can definitely say that for cinema, we desire a kind of auteur. That even if it is proved that the film can't be and medium where one can express oneself as spontaneously like that of a painting, like that of a short story, or like that of a poem. But still, we need an artist who is coordinating the entire thing in a cinema. And this artist, the presence of this artist, the better his presence, the better the film. And today we see that the idea of auteur is also commercially exploited by mainstream cinema, by mainstream studios. So we know definitely that what is an Anurag Kashyap film. We definitely know what is a Ram Gopal Verma film or a Karan Johar film. So we definitely know what is a Steven Spielberg film. Even when a film is promoted, it's said that this is a Martin Scorsese film instead of saying that this is a film from this studio, this is a film of this genre, this is a film starring this star, so on and so forth. So one can say that though in film theory less are thought about the auteur these days than 20 years ago, but the term auteur is definitely still alive. It's a still very functionally important thing which happens in the commercial circuit, even in the commercial circuit, not only in art cinema.